Hey everyone, on today's video I thought it'd be a great idea to take another look at the latest developments on the Canon R3. So I did a video a few weeks ago about that Canon R3 camera when Canon made that initial announcement. And you can see that video by clicking the link at the bottom of the screen. The Canon R3 is a mirrorless camera, and while the details in that initial announcement were pretty vague, what we do know really got us quite excited. To refresh your memory, the Canon R3 is going to be a mirrorless camera, and it had some incredible specs that caught the eye, the kind of headline specs in that initial Canon announcement. The specs we know about at the minute, the kind of headline stat, is that this camera is going to be capable of shooting at a massive 30 frames per second when using the electric shutter, and that is with the promise of minimal image distortion. Now, if you've ever used an electric shutter on a mirrorless camera, you'll know that certainly in the early days of mirrorless cameras, the quicker the shutter was, the more distortion in the image that you'd see. Well, Canon are promising it's going to be minimally distorted when you're shooting at that 30 frames per second rate. A brand new eye control autofocus system has also been designed from the ground up by Canon for inclusion on the R3. And this kind of eye control focus is something we first saw on Canon bodies a couple of decades ago. Canon since parked that technology, certainly on a lot of the more recent bodies, but they're bringing that back with brand newly developed functionality, and that is going to be really interesting to see how that works in reality. Add to that weather resistance, advanced connectivity, that lovely new carbon fiber look grip that's going to be on the body, and the R3 is shaping up to be an absolute superstar, certainly when it comes to sports photography at least. Last week, some new details emerged from Canon, or from a Canon representative, that gives us a little bit more insight into the positioning of the Canon R3. So when this announcement came out, it prompted a load of questions, some which I asked and kind of discussed and analysed in that initial video I mentioned a moment ago. But one of the biggest questions around the R3 is just where it's going to position, certainly where the positioning will be in relation to the Canon 1DX III, which is the current professional flagship DSLR. Andrei Tishenko from Canon Russia gave a great interview recently that really teased some more details out around the placement of the R3. Now, the interview was recently translated back on canonrumors.com. Head over there to see that. Those guys do a great job on all things Canon, and this is the information that came out in that interview. And what Tishenko said about the Canon R3 is that this is going to be aimed at both professionals, but also those serious advanced amateurs. So this isn't an all-out professional body that the Canon EOS R3 is. And he also said the R3 is not even going to be the flagship within the R range. So currently we've got the R5, the R3 is the next, the most advanced R series camera that is going to be coming out. But he did say it's not the flagship of the R series, and that leads us to speculate that on the back of the R3 there will probably be an R1 at some point in the future. Tishenko also confirmed that this camera is going to be aimed at sports photographers, wildlife photographers, racing photographers, and sport and photojournalists. Now, someone replied to my last video asking where this R3 is going to be sitting in terms of price, and I replied to that comment suggesting probably around the £5,000 mark, based on the prices that we know for the R5 and also the 1DX III. This information has come to light in the last week or so, only really backs up my estimate, if you like, that it will be around that price point, but hopefully we'll get a little bit more information in the coming days as to just how accurate that'll be. Most intriguing of all this information, certainly to me, was that if this camera isn't kind of intended to replace the 1DX III, and let's not forget, let's keep this clear that the R3 is a mirrorless camera, the 1DX III is not, it's a DSLR full frame camera. But if it wasn't meant to kind of replace that, because the technology in this R3 and the stats that we know, or the specs that we know at this point are mightily impressive. So if it's not replacing the 1DX, what happens next in that range? Well, if you're not already aware, Canon release a 1D every 4 years, normally to coincide with the timing of the Olympics. So that's a little bit out of kilter this time, because the Canon 1DX III was released last January 2020 in time for the Tokyo Olympics. Those Olympic Games are obviously now, because of the pandemic, taking place in 2021, this year in August. So there's not going to be a 1D this year. So for any photographers who are looking for some newer technology in their body, maybe want something a bit newer, something a bit different or higher end in terms of the frames per second than the 1DX Mark III. Theoretically, there's not going to be a new 1DX or 1D line camera due for another 3 years yet if Canon stick to the usual schedule. So what that will mean is that people might be tempted to switch over to the R series. Now, obviously it's not as straightforward as that, because if you're kind of shifting from the 1DX range into the R series range, the R3 for example, you are going to have to change all of your lenses, or at the very least buy an adapter. The R3 is that RF mount, don't forget, for the lenses. Covered that in the first video. 1DX Mark III, Mark II, Mark I, etc. They're all EF lenses. So it's not as simple as just if you want something newer, move to the R3. It's not that simple, but it is a real interesting consideration. Anyway, the rain is getting heavier on my roof outside, so I'm going to stop filming now. Any new news or information that we get, I will make sure that I do another video and keep you up to date, both on the R3 and the RF lenses. But for now, thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Any questions you've got, please pop them in the comments below. I'll try to answer every single one of them, or maybe cover it in another video. And last but not least, please check out my other tutorials on this channel, all relating to sports photography, editing photos, and that sort of thing. Thanks for watching.